Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the press conference following the meeting of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of Latvia and Liechtenstein. Working languages are Latvian and English with simultaneous interpretation. We are live stream on the Ministry webpage and Facebook account. We'll start with a statement by Mr. Rinkevich. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Indeed, we just had a meeting with the Liechtenstein Foreign Minister, Madam Hasler, who has come to Latvia upon my invitation. We mostly focused on three topics. First topic being our bilateral cooperation between Latvia and Liechtenstein, the political dialogue, cultural cooperation and economic cooperation is what we discussed during today's meeting. I should say that on many issues we share a very similar opinion. We are two like-minded countries when it comes to Russian war against Ukraine and international rules-based order. We cooperate very closely and very efficiently in the UN, European Organization for Security and Cooperation, and Council of Europe. And that is actually the second topic that we discussed quite extensively. In a couple of days, the Council of Europe summit will take place, and we will become the presiding country of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe for 6 months, and we will be succeeded by Liechtenstein. So we talked about the Council of Europe agenda, about the establishment of the Register of Damages under the auspices of Council of Europe to assess the damages caused by Russia during the war in Ukraine, and that will allow us to redeem the compensations for the damages that Russia has caused to the Ukrainian state and its people in the coming years. So we of course talked also about Latvia's national priorities such as media, press freedom, strengthening of the democracy, and also Council of Europe reforms that we, after the summit of Reykjavik, will start to implement, and we will pass over the implementation of these reforms to our Liechtenstein colleagues. And last topic, or third topic that we discussed quite broadly, was the very close cooperation, very efficient cooperation on the establishment of the International Tribunal for holding Russia accountable for war crimes in Ukraine. We both agreed that we need an international tribunal, and we need to also reach out to many UN countries, our partners, and Ukraine, of course, in the establishment, in the process of the establishment of such a tribunal. In fact, last autumn during the UN General Assembly in New York in September, we attended several events that discussed or focused on such tribunals. So our cooperation, as I mentioned, in the international organizations and on a bilateral level, where the main key topics that we focused on. I'm very happy to welcome my colleague Riga. And last proper bilateral meeting we had was in 2017 with the then Liechtenstein Prime Minister, head of the government and Foreign Minister, and 6 years later we meet again to continue our dialogue. Now the floor is given to the Liechtenstein Minister. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank you, dear Minister, dear Edgar, for welcoming me and my delegation in your beautiful country, and thank you very much for your kind hospitality. In times like the present, standing together among like-minded countries is of particular importance. We already heard this from your Minister of Foreign Affairs, and with meeting like this we can demonstrate our unity with regard of a lot of topics laying on the table, but also with regards to the war of aggression against Ukraine and its far-reaching consequences. We heard it, we discussed first the bilateral cooperation between Principality of Liechtenstein and Latvia, and I'm always saying we are like-minded states, but we also have the chance that we are always sitting next to each other. We are because we are L countries, and so that's also symbolically a sign how strong our cooperation and our bond between our two countries is. On a bilateral level, we do work very closely together. Liechtenstein is a member of the EEA. That's the closest partnership to the EU. So we did condemn the war against Ukraine from the first second on. We did implement all the sanctions. So for us, the EU is a very important partner, and also on a bilateral level, we do work very close together with Latvia. And I want to thank you for all the cooperation and the support. We also had a discussion about the same challenges in the education system, being also Minister of Education. And being also Minister of Sports, we also talked about the same challenging in the area of sport. Second, as mentioned, Latvia is taking over the presidency of the Council of Europe and will hand it over afterwards to Liechtenstein. That's another issue which we are sharing with L countries. We are also giving over presidencies, and I'm particularly looking forward to working together in the Council of Europe. And I think it's very important that also after the summit in Reykjavik, we do have a strong dialogue about our main topics, so that we can also talk about the important task, and that we are also able to develop those projects together between Latvia and Liechtenstein. Third, the topic was, as also mentioned, the special tribunal, and Minister of Foreign Affairs already mentioned it. Also there we are really like-minded. We do work together in a core group at the UN. We do also, like Latvia, support the creation of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression together with Ukraine. We are 100% aware that we should not weaken our efforts to support Ukraine. Furthermore, we also owe it to ourselves to stand up for our values, to stand up for the defense and for peaceful coexistence in Europe and the world. And for this, I cannot underline, and I cannot be as much thankful as I am for all the cooperation, for the honest dialogue, and I'm really looking forward to further strengthen our cooperation. Thank you very much for the hospitality here in Latvia.
Paldies ministriem. Vai būtu jautājumi?
Thank you. Do we have any questions now? The time for questions, and please also mention the media you represent. You can ask the question either in English or Latvian. So the mic is on, and I'll use the opportunity to ask the question in Latvian. Question to both ministers about the bilateral cooperation. Mr. Rinkevich already listed some of the areas in which we are cooperating, but what are the sort of common denominators between Liechtenstein and Latvia? Tangible cooperation projects or initiatives that you would mention? Well, I'll start, and my colleague can add her thoughts. There are two tangible results of our cooperation. During my visit 6 years ago and today, we discussed with Liechtenstein minister the vocational education system. We are small countries that need to try hard constantly to upgrade their economy, upgrade their education systems. But the way Liechtenstein has been dealing with the training of labor force, of workforce on a vocational education level is, worth learning from, in fact. And that's one level. And there's also the business level. And we also talked about, for example, cooperation in the digital area. Liechtenstein is also part or a member of the European Economic Area, or EEA, which means that on an economic level we are very closely integrated and very closely cooperating with Liechtenstein as a member of the EU. and colleague already in fact mentioned the second dimension, as she said that sports is one of the areas in her portfolio. We talked about joint effort, and we also are very much like-minded on the Paris Olympic Games and the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in these Olympic Games, or rather the ban of these athletes. And these are the ways that we can work together to move forward the political agenda. Now, as I already mentioned, so there are two tangible results. So first of all, as I already mentioned, and I'll pass this on to the colleagues, that we will need to enhance our cooperation on the vocational education with Liechtenstein to transfer that experience, and also we will talk in particular cooperate in digital economy as well.
Thank you very much for the question. Perhaps you allow me to add that I already mentioned that Liechtenstein is integrated into the EU single market, and for us this covers a lot of more area than just the economic area. So we do participate in areas like justice, home affairs, taxation, education. We also do support the EEA grants very intensive, and Latvia is one of the beneficiary states under the EEA grant. So I think that shows that being a member of the EEA covers a lot of areas where we do share common or projects, and also, like Minister already mentioned, we really do look forward where we, as small countries, do have opportunities to even further have cooperations, and as mentioned, the vocational training is such a possibility. But I also had discussion with the Major Minister of Home Affairs of Latvia today. We do see the same challenges when it comes to integration of refugees. There we also have some programs in Liechtenstein where the ambassador is going to join, and I think there are really a lot of opportunities where we can further strengthen our cooperation.
Paldies, ministre. Vai vēl būs jautājums?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I have, in fact, two questions, if I'm allowed to ask two questions. So the question to Madam Hassler about sports, in particular, Mr. Rinkevich mentioned that countries are very much united, and we should prevent Belarusian and Russian athletes from participating in the Paris Games. A lot has been said about banning them, but how will that be implemented? Do we have any way to politically influence this? Because the decision will eventually, at the end of the day, be taken by IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and they say that they're politically neutral. But are there any ways to somehow politically influence their decision, you know, the outcome of this issue, and how like-minded countries like ours could influence this?
Vēl viens bija Krišķums vai?
Es varu uzdot tagad uzreiz, vai I can ask my question now or later?
Uzreiz uzdodiet, lūdzu.
So the second question is about supporting Ukraine. Again, we have to take into account that although Liechtenstein is even smaller than Latvia, but generally in terms of population, at the European scale, we are considered rather small countries. So what are the most efficient ways for such small countries to affect or influence the thinking of big countries on particular matters or issues? The reason why I'm asking this is that, for example, on this weekend, I think in Cologne and Frankfurt, we saw rallies in support of Russia with Russian Soviet flags, people singing Russian Soviet songs. Nothing of that would be acceptable here. Nothing of that would also probably be acceptable in Liechtenstein. But going back to my initial question, how can small countries change the thinking of the big countries? Thank you.
Yeah. Lūdzu.
Dominique, you start.
Thank you. Perhaps I start with the question about the topic of sports. I think that's a very important question, and I think that's how diplomatic work should be organized. I think we have to stand together. We have to have a loud voice when it comes to values, when it comes to shared values, and that's what we are doing also when it comes to the topic of the sports. We are trying to coordinate under each other. We have a lot of dialogues about these topics on Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also Ministry of Sports. And there are a lot of dialogues, and I think that's the importance, that we are not just quiet. I think that's also the answer of the second question I would give. Even if you are a small country, there is the principle of one nation, one vote. And it doesn't depend on the size of a country, it depends on the competence, it depends on the coordination power, and there I think we do really share the same, not only the same values, also the same structures, and that's the opportunity of cooperations between countries. And perhaps you just allow me to mention one example. Liechtenstein, also with the support of Latvia, did table a resolution about the veto initiative. We didn't want to have the veto in the Security Council as the last word, because the veto can block the whole discussion. So we as a small country really have been successful. By consensus, we could adopt this resolution, and that shows everybody can have one voice, and everybody can change things if we stand together, and that's what we live. We do not have an armed force. We cannot support Ukraine with military forces, but what we can, if we can bring in our expertise where we have expertise. And one opportunity of a small country is we always say in Liechtenstein, we do have short ways. So sometimes that's also a little bit an opportunity together with the Ministry of Sport. Sometimes we are quite fast.
Es laikam papildināšu, šis bija ļoti interesanti jautājumi.
I would like to also add my opinion regarding both questions. First, regarding the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris Games. We have a bit more than a year to go still until the Olympic Games. A lot can change in these 12 months or more in the international politics, and also, of course, we hope that Ukraine will also make progress in liberating its country, and hopefully will have some kind of political vehicle thanks to the victories of Ukraine. But it's very difficult to predict in 2023 in May where we'll be in 2024 June. But my experience, and this is partly an answer to your second question, especially in the recent or past 18 months, has shown that things that initially seem impossible to you and seem to require a lot of diplomatic effort and hard work can come true, no matter how impossible they may seem at the start. And unfortunately, there are countries that tend to mix up sports and politics, or culture and politics a lot. There are countries that are saying that participation of Russian athletes in the Olympic Games has nothing to do with politics. But just look at, where those athletes are registered, how they are funded. They are either military, they are inscribed or enrolled in the military, or supported by different financial institutions, state-owned enterprises like Gazprom and others, who are very, much politically driven or politically dependent. So we will try to use the next 12 months together with our athletic community to convince the IOC decision makers, as well as other decision makers around the world, that such participation of the Russian Belarusian athletes is unacceptable. We have the time, and we can only advocate for that. Now, as regards to large countries and various rallies in those large countries, well, I think it would be worth looking at who are taking part in those rallies. Those are actually Russian citizens, Russian nationals who are living there, and from time to time we can also see the articles that are claiming that people through social media are also driving those rallies using the secret services and agencies. If you take the general population of those big countries, they broadly support Ukraine, but that's democracy and that's how laws in different countries work. I wouldn't make any far-reaching conclusions about the support to the Russian aggression in one or another small European country, knowing how, scrupulous Russian secret services are in creating the image of support to Russia. And just, listen in what language they were singing the Katyusha. Was it German or Russian? Was it? So thank you to the both ministers. We have no other questions. This concludes our press conference. Thank you all.